I need to marry you immediately because the thought of building a life without you feels like choosing an empty house over a warm, living home. I need to marry you immediately because your voice is the only sound that brings peace to the noise inside my mind. I need to marry you immediately because we've already lived 1,000 lifetimes together in my heart, and I'm ready to live them for real. I need to marry you immediately because every time you smile, I feel myself falling deeper into a love I can no longer control. I need to marry you immediately because you've become the reason I believe something beautiful is waiting for me every morning. I need to marry you immediately because when I imagine the happiest version of me, you're always standing right next to him. I need to marry you immediately because being with you feels like being wrapped in a warmth I never want to step out of. I need to marry you immediately because every part of my soul recognizes you as the one I've been unconsciously searching for. I need to marry you immediately because with you, even silence feels sacred, like a conversation only our hearts understand. I need to marry you immediately because losing you is a future I refuse to even imagine. I need to marry you immediately because every dream I had before you now feels incomplete without your presence in it. I need to marry you immediately because you're the one person who makes my fears quiet down and my hopes grow louder. I need to marry you immediately because your touch feels like a promise, and I want to honor that promise with forever. I need to marry you immediately because the love I have for you grows stronger, even on days when I barely see you. I need to marry you immediately because your laughter has healed wounds I thought I'd always carry. I need to marry you immediately because being yours feels like a privilege I don't ever want to lose. I need to marry you immediately because my soul feels calmer, softer, and safer the moment you enter the room. I need to marry you immediately because every future plan I make includes your happiness as a priority. I need to marry you immediately because you've become the reason I look forward to tomorrow. I need to marry you immediately because your heart speaks a language mine understands perfectly. I need to marry you immediately because from the moment I met you, I knew you were going to change everything. I need to marry you immediately because your presence feels like a miracle, and I'm not willing to risk losing it. I need to marry you immediately because you make me feel chosen, valued, and understood in a way no one else ever has. I need to marry you immediately because I want to grow old with the person who makes life feel young and alive again. I need to marry you immediately because loving you has become the most natural thing I've ever done. I need to marry you immediately because every second without you feels like a moment stolen from the life we're meant to build. I need to marry you immediately because your love has turned my fears into something I can finally overcome. I need to marry you immediately because I crave the comfort of knowing you'll be the face I come home to every evening. I need to marry you immediately because you're the home my heart has been knocking on since the beginning. I need to marry you immediately because you make me want forever with a certainty that scares me in the best way. I need to marry you immediately because your presence feels like fate, and I'm ready to honor that fate with everything I am. I need to marry you immediately because I've never felt more sure about anything in my entire life. I need to marry you immediately because your kindness touches parts of me I didn't know needed healing. I need to marry you immediately because I want to build traditions with you, memories with you, and a world filled with our laughter. I need to marry you immediately because even when I'm tired, your love gives me the strength to keep going. I need to marry you immediately because every moment spent with you feels like a chapter in the story I want to read forever. I need to marry you immediately because my heart has stopped wandering. It found its place the day it found you. I need to marry you immediately because your existence makes my life feel meaningful in ways I never expected. I need to marry you immediately because with you, even mundane moments become unforgettable memories. I need to marry you immediately because the thought of sharing my life with anyone else feels wrong in every possible way. I need to marry you immediately because your soul feels like the missing piece mine has been aching for. I need to marry you immediately because you make me want to love deeper, speak softer, and live more intentionally. I need to marry you immediately because you bring out a version of me I didn't know I could become. I need to marry you immediately because loving you in silence has become too painful, and I want the world to know you're mine in the loudest way possible. I need to marry you immediately because every moment without you feels like wasted time, and my soul is begging for a lifetime with you. I need to marry you immediately because the future doesn't make sense unless your hand is in mine, guiding me through everything that's coming. I need to marry you immediately because my heart has stopped searching, my mind has stopped wandering, and everything inside me points directly to you. I need to marry you immediately because waking up without your name beside mine feels like a life I don't want to live anymore. I need to marry you immediately because no matter how much I try to slow down, my love for you accelerates every plan I ever made. I need to marry you immediately because I can't picture another sunrise without the promise of you standing next to me forever. I need to marry you immediately because you feel like destiny knocking on my door, and I refuse to keep pretending I don't hear it. I need to marry you immediately because every version of my future includes you, smiling at me like I'm the reason your world feels lighter. I need to marry you immediately because the thought of losing you terrifies me more than any storm I've ever walked through alone. I need to marry you immediately because you make me feel things I've never felt, things I can't explain, things I don't ever want to lose. I need to marry you immediately because loving you has become my favorite habit, one I want to keep for the rest of my life. I need to marry you immediately because you've seen my flaws, my fears, my chaos, and somehow you still choose me every single day. I need to marry you immediately because the way you look at me feels like a home I've been searching decades for. I need to marry you immediately because every kiss feels like a promise, and I'm ready to turn that promise into forever. I need to marry you immediately because my heart doesn't want an option. It wants you and only you, endlessly. I need to marry you immediately because you bring peace to places inside me I didn't even know were hurting. I need to marry you immediately because you make life softer, brighter, and somehow more manageable just by standing there. I need to marry you immediately because the love I have for you refuses to fit into anything temporary. I need to marry you immediately because my soul recognized you before my eyes ever did, and it hasn't stopped calling your name since. I need to marry you immediately because you've turned my loneliness into something I no longer remember how to feel. I need to marry you immediately because you've become the safest place I've ever known, and I want to live there forever. I need to marry you immediately because every goodbye to you feels wrong, like it shouldn't exist between two people meant for each other. I need to marry you immediately because you make me want to try harder, love deeper, and become the best version of myself. I need to marry you immediately because forever feels too short when it comes to loving you. I need to marry you immediately because every dream I have leads back to you, no matter where it starts. I need to marry you immediately because you've given my life meaning in ways I never knew love could. I need to marry you immediately because the world feels less heavy when your voice is in it. I need to marry you immediately because you're the only person who sees my weaknesses and calls them beautiful. I need to marry you immediately because I want to build a life where your smile is my daily reward. I need to marry you immediately because being yours feels better than any victory I've ever celebrated. I need to marry you immediately because your presence makes even the most ordinary days unforgettable. I need to marry you immediately because I've never wanted something so deeply, so urgently, so completely. I need to marry you immediately because you've touched my heart in places love has never reached before. I need to marry you immediately because losing you is a fear I refuse to entertain for another second. I need to marry you immediately because you're the first person who made me believe in forever again. I need to marry you immediately because my heart beats differently when you're near, like it recognizes its home. I need to marry you immediately because you make me believe that love can be gentle, safe, and breathtaking at the same time. I need to marry you immediately because there's a future waiting for us, and I don't want to keep it waiting anymore. I need to marry you immediately because your energy pulls me in like gravity, and I never want to escape it. I need to marry you immediately because I want to build a home, a life, and a legacy with your name written beside mine.